Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor insisted staff bow to him, with bizarre punishment if they got it wrong. For months, the palace has worked quietly to move attention away from one name. Fewer statements. Fewer appearances. Less said, the better. But when a disgraced royal suddenly reappears, no titles, no honors, no official role, the questions return immediately. And this time, they arrive alongside deeply uncomfortable accounts from people who were there. Former staff. Insiders. Witnesses who describe a pattern of control, humiliation, and bizarre punishment rituals carried out behind palace doors. These stories never fully disappeared. They were simply waiting. And now, with new images, renewed scrutiny, and public patience wearing thin, they are colliding again, at the worst possible moment for the monarchy. And if you want more updates on the royal family, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video so others can join the conversation. It was meant to pass almost unnoticed. No announcements, no statements, no carefully staged photographs released afterward. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Sarah Ferguson appeared quietly at their granddaughter's christening, their first public moment together since losing their remaining royal titles and honors. There was no balcony wave, no attempt to project warmth or celebration. They stood, observed, and left. That restraint appeared deliberate, an effort to signal dignity and normality at a time when both have become liabilities rather than assets to the institution. But it was what happened next that drew attention. While other family members continued on to a relaxed pub gathering, Andrew and Sarah did not join them. They departed early, creating a visible contrast between inclusion and isolation. In royal circles, absence often speaks louder than presence, and this one landed heavily. Rather than closing the chapter, the appearance reopened it. For the public, the moment felt unresolved. A disgraced royal does not simply re-enter public view without consequence, even briefly. Each appearance now acts like a trigger, inviting people to revisit what they already know, and what they suspect was never fully addressed. Attempts at quiet dignity clash with lingering questions, and the result is renewed scrutiny. Those renewed questions are fueled by a growing sense that what the public knows may represent only a fraction of the full story. According to those who have examined Andrew's behavior closely, the allegations now resurfacing are not isolated claims or exaggerated anecdotes. They are part of a much larger body of testimony that never fully reached daylight. Research into Andrew's conduct reportedly spanned 4 years. During that time, investigators identified around 3,000 individuals who may have witnessed or experienced his behavior firsthand. Only about 300 ultimately agreed to speak. That gap matters. It reflects not a lack of incidents, but a culture of fear, silence, and institutional pressure that discourages disclosure. Palace environments are hierarchical by design, and challenging a senior royal carries consequences few are willing to risk. Importantly, this is not just hearsay. Legal depositions, corroborated accounts, and on-record testimony exist. Long-serving aides, people deeply familiar with royal norms, have described behavior that stunned even them. These were not misunderstandings of protocol. They were experiences that crossed professional boundaries. What has emerged publicly, insiders suggest, may only be the tip of the iceberg. And the timing of its re-emergence matters. With Andrew weakened, stripped of status, and public tolerance exhausted, stories once buried now find an audience ready to listen. Among the most unsettling accounts to emerge are those describing Andrew's fixation on hierarchy and visible displays of obedience. According to multiple former staff members, he allegedly insisted that anyone present bow when he entered a room. This alone might be dismissed as old-fashioned formality, but the stories do not end there. If a bow was deemed insufficient, too slow, too shallow, or poorly timed, Andrew would reportedly stop, leave the room, and say, "Let us try that again." He would then re-enter, forcing the staff member to repeat the ritual correctly. Those who witnessed it say the repetition was not ceremonial. It was corrective. And that distinction mattered deeply to those on the receiving end. Tradition became a tool for enforcement, transforming an outdated gesture into a moment of humiliation. Staff did not interpret this as playful eccentricity or harmless royal stiffness. They saw it as control. In a modern royal workplace, where public messaging emphasizes professionalism, respect, and emotional intelligence, such behavior felt deliberately regressive. It reminded junior staff exactly where they stood. The psychological effect was significant. Younger aides described heightened anxiety, constantly monitoring posture, timing, and tone. Mistakes were not learning moments, they were punishments. Over time, this created an environment where fear replaced trust. For many, the bow was no longer symbolic of service to the crown, but of submission to one man's authority. The allegations do not stop at protocol disputes. Former insiders also describe a volatile temper that spilled into both professional and personal spaces. Andrew is alleged to have engaged in explosive arguments with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, so intense that staff members claim he sometimes had to be physically restrained. These were not private disagreements quietly absorbed by palace walls. They were loud, emotional confrontations that staff could hear and feel. Accounts describe shouting, profanities, and an atmosphere of intimidation that lingered long after the arguments ended. For those working nearby, the unpredictability was deeply unsettling. Respect was replaced with caution. Silence became a survival strategy. Staff learned to anticipate moods, avoid triggers, and stay invisible when tensions rose. These stories sharply complicate the carefully maintained public image of Andrew as an affable, slightly awkward prince. Behind closed doors, aides describe someone capable of creating fear through volume, anger, and presence alone. The contrast between public persona and private conduct is part of what makes the allegations so damaging. Palace awareness is another uncomfortable element. Such behavior, insiders suggest, could not have gone entirely unnoticed. Yet it was never formally documented. Outbursts rarely make it into official records, especially when they involve senior royals. The result was high staff turnover and a workplace shaped more by endurance than loyalty. The culture of strict hierarchy extended beyond formal protocol into the most arbitrary and personal areas of Andrew's alleged control. Former staff describe incidents where aides were removed from their positions over seemingly trivial issues. One was reportedly dismissed because Andrew disliked the appearance of a mole on his face. Another lost his role for wearing a nylon tie. These were not matters of competence or professional standards, performance was not called into question. Instead, decisions were driven by personal irritation, whims, and an intolerance for even minor imperfections. What makes these actions particularly troubling is how quickly they moved from standards into cruelty. For those employed in the royal household, adherence to rules and appearance expectations is understood. But in these cases, the boundary between workplace expectation and personal obsession was blurred entirely. Staff members reportedly felt that no action could be considered safe, that even the smallest deviation from Andrew's preferences could carry consequences. The unpredictability generated fear, eroding confidence and morale. These anecdotes highlight more than just unusual demands, they reveal entitlement. Authority was exercised without accountability, and the people tasked with serving the royal household were subjected to inconsistent, often humiliating treatment. Staff learned quickly that compliance was never enough, satisfaction of one day's standard could be meaningless the next. This arbitrary enforcement created an oppressive work environment, where personal preferences became law, and minor imperfections could have career-ending consequences. Some of Andrew's alleged demands extended beyond arbitrary removals into everyday tasks designed to assert control. One former aide claimed that staff were required to climb 4 flights of stairs every morning simply to open his bedroom curtains. This was not a necessity, the prince was fully capable of performing the task himself, but it became a ritualized form of service that reinforced hierarchy. Repetition turned a minor chore into an instrument of psychological control. Such demands went beyond mere inconvenience. By assigning physically unnecessary tasks, Andrew's alleged behavior ensured that his authority was visible, unquestioned, and inescapable. For staff, the act of opening curtains each day became a small but constant reminder of their subordinate position. Routine repetition, insiders suggest, created a pattern of conditioning, compliance under scrutiny, unquestioned obedience, and an environment where every action was evaluated for deference. In a professional context, royal protocol might require respect and certain ceremonial practices. But here, the line between expectation and enforced submission was crossed. Staff described these routines as deliberate, intended to assert dominance rather than facilitate household efficiency. Over time, the emotional toll accumulated. Staff endured fatigue, anxiety, and a sense of constant surveillance, making even minor tasks feel punishing. What should have been service became a daily exercise in humiliation, a subtle yet persistent reinforcement of authority that left long-lasting psychological effects. Allegations surrounding Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor extend beyond personal whims and psychological control into the realm of misuse of public resources. Former staff recount instances where trained, publicly funded professionals were asked to perform tasks far outside their official duties. A television technician was reportedly summoned late at night simply to explain how a remote control worked. Police protection officers, tasked with ensuring safety, were allegedly assigned to collect Andrew's used golf balls or even locate women on his behalf. These requests, if accurate, blurred the lines between personal convenience and public responsibility. Insiders were reportedly alarmed by the misuse of personnel who were neither personal servants nor casual aides. Their presence and training were funded by taxpayers to ensure security and operational integrity, not to satisfy arbitrary demands. Assigning them to menial or personal errands undermined morale and created ethical concerns among those responsible for oversight. Public expectations of duty further complicate perception. Citizens expect that funds allocated for security and support serve the institution and the public good, not individual amusement or entitlement. Stories of these surreal tasks, therefore, do more than shock, they erode credibility. They reinforce a narrative of unchecked authority and entitlement, creating a perception that personal whims could override professional standards, leaving lasting questions about governance, accountability, and institutional oversight. The handling of allegations against Andrew highlights a perceived double standard within the royal household. When claims regarding Meghan Markle's treatment of staff emerged, Buckingham Palace launched a formal investigation. Public scrutiny followed, processes were activated, and accountability measures were considered. At the same time, insiders say the palace quietly braced itself for historic complaints about Andrew, allegations of bullying, temper, and arbitrary punishment that had circulated quietly for years. Yet, unlike Meghan's case, these claims were never formally examined. Silence reigned, creating a striking discrepancy in accountability. For observers, this fuels suspicion. Protection for senior royals appeared prioritized over objective investigation, while scrutiny for newer or less established figures was swift and transparent. The gap between response and inaction raises difficult questions about whether the institution places its reputation above ethical standards or employee welfare. Silence, particularly in these circumstances, can be interpreted as tacit endorsement or dismissal. The lack of formal inquiry into Andrew's alleged actions, despite corroborating testimonies, contrasts sharply with public expectations for fairness. Institutional self-preservation may explain the reticence, but the reputational cost is lasting. Not only does it undermine trust in internal oversight, it also perpetuates perceptions that power and privilege allow selective accountability. For staff and the public alike, these inconsistencies cast a long shadow over the monarchy's credibility and commitment to ethical standards. The press has shifted its framing, increasingly treating the images as evidence of unresolved issues rather than historical artifacts. Where once Andrew's associations might have been considered a closed chapter, the repeated resurfacing of these photographs keeps the controversy alive, colliding directly with staff accounts. Visual confirmation can land harder than testimony, embedding a perception of continuity between public and private behavior. For many, the men in the images is inseparable from the men described behind palace doors. For the public, the central question is no longer appearances or official status. It is about behavior, how power was exercised, how staff were treated, and whether accountability will ever be enforced. Will these stories provoke a reckoning, prompting structural or cultural change within the royal household? Or will they fade once again, like past scandals, leaving patterns of entitlement and abuse unchallenged? The answer remains uncertain, but the implications for trust, transparency, and reputation are undeniable. Audiences are left to watch, reflect, and decide for themselves.